our Agile Live webinar series on achieving business agility at the portfolio level. I'm thrilled to see that so many of you have come back for more. My name is Claire George and I'll be hosting today's event. I do want to take a moment to thank all of you who watched part 1 of this webinar series with Mike Hotmeyer. From the feedback we received, it sounds as though Mike's presentation resonated extremely well with what many of you are trying to achieve in your own organizations in terms of scaling Agile. If you missed part 1, don't worry, we'll be starting off with a quick recap of the main concepts that Mike discussed. And then from there, we'll take it a step further by providing practical guidance on how you can simplify Agile at scale using version 1. So on that note, I'd like to introduce you to Andy Powell, Product Evangelist at version 1. Welcome, Andy, and thanks for being here today.
Well, thank you, Claire. I'm looking forward to showing how version 1 supports what Mike talked about last week.
Great. Well, before we get started, let's quickly go over a couple of housekeeping items. We'll be following the same format as last week's webinar with a 40-minute presentation followed by Q&A. So for those of you who haven't used GoToWebinar before, here are the main need-to-knows. You'll notice at the top of the control panel on the left-hand side, there is a button with double arrows. You can click this button to collapse the control panel during the presentation so it doesn't interfere with your viewing. All of your lines are muted throughout the presentation. So if you have questions, please send them in using the control panel, and at the end of the presentation, we will answer as many questions as we have time for. Finally, today's webinar is being recorded, and we'll be sending you an email in a day or two with a link to view the recording of today's event. Before Andy jumps into how to implement Enterprise Agile using version 1, we would like to ask you a couple of questions to help us understand a little more about your experiences with Agile at scale. So the first question we would like you to respond to is your organization currently applying Agile portfolio and program management practices? The choices you can select from are yes, no, not yet, but we're planning to, or we're learning about it. And I'll just give everyone a few more seconds to respond, and then we'll take a look at the results. Interestingly, this is actually a question we also asked in our 7th State of Agile Development Survey, and so in a moment we will also compare the results with those. So I think most of the answers are in here. So let's take a look and share those results. So it looks as though a large number of you, 31%, are actually already practicing Agile at this level, and it seems like there's still a large number of people who are either looking into it, learning about it, and kind of figuring out where to get going. So let's compare that with the results of our State of Agile survey. So here's how the respondents answered the same question. I should point out that these results aren't actually official yet, so they haven't officially been released yet, but I thought it would be interesting to share given that it's so relevant to our discussion today. This year we had more than 4,000 individuals respond, and as you can see, the percentage of people actually practicing Agile portfolio management is still relatively low compared to what our audience today is already doing. A growing number of organizations are planning to practice it, but for the most part in the survey it seems that people are still learning or have limited understanding about what it really is. So the results of the State of Agile Development Survey should be released in the next week or so.
We're still seeing the poll, Claire. The poll answers.
Okay, sorry about that. Let me see what I need to do there to get it back to the...
There we go.
Okay. Wonderful. Sorry about that, everybody. So let me go back then to the results so that you can see what we were looking at there. Okay, so there we go. There's how the results of the survey turned out. So moving on, we are going to launch another poll. So we would like to just find out how you are currently capturing your strategic plans in your organization. So if you could just take a moment to answer this question. The responses to choose from here are you currently doing it more informally through perhaps a conversation or maybe an email? Perhaps you're relying predominantly on Excel, Word, and PowerPoint. If you're using an application lifecycle management tool, we'd love to hear about that. And perhaps you're also still using a project portfolio management tool. So we'll just take a look and see how the results are looking there. And I think the results are mostly in. So let me close that and share the results. So it looks as though most folks are predominantly relying on Excel, Word, and PowerPoint. A large proportion there also using a project portfolio management tool. Andy, any observations or comments on the results that you'd like to share?
I think it sounds like the group that's here today is somewhat close to what we saw in the surveys. So that's especially that large group of people that are kind of just learning about it. Hopefully you can take this away. And I think, Claire, I don't know if you had mentioned it yet, but we're also going to follow up with some resources that should further help the people who are kind of just getting started with learning about how to support Agile in large organizations.
Absolutely, and I'll share some more details about that at the end of the presentation. So let's move on. I think it's a good time to hand over to you, Andy. As I mentioned, Andy is the product evangelist here at version 1, and he has a huge amount of passion and experience when it comes to helping organizations scale Agile. So on that note, over to you, Andy.
All right, thanks, Claire. And Andy Powell, I've been at version 1 for several years now and focused on helping organizations kind of understand how version 1 can support Agile. And it's pretty exciting to see us kind of branching outside of the software development team and moving into larger a part of the software development organization to support those program and portfolio levels. So today, what I wanted to first do is take you through and give you the quick recap of what Mike went over last week. I'm sure most of you saw that presentation, either last Wednesday or watched the video. But I did want to just kind of level set and kind of warm up, and then we'll use that same structure that Mike had presented to walk through version 1, so you can tie in some of the practices and perspectives he gave to the version 1 application. So the first thing Mike talked about, this is not just a quick process overlay. It really requires transforming the organization, and that's going to mean adopting some new practices. Examples of those practices might be doing daily stand-ups or doing retrospectives, and those practices are going to really hit all those different levels in your Agile organization: the daily stand-up, the iteration planning, the release planning, and then strategic planning. The other thing that Mike mentioned was this concept that the way you're structuring your organization is going to also change. So team design and how you think about aligning your resources that you have available may require some rethinking. Probably will. And then the final thing is that personal transformation side. So the way that people think about how software development should get delivered, what are those cultural norms? That also requires quite a big transformation to really make all this work. So that was a starting point, and Mike went into a little bit more detail on just what are those teams. So it starts with the development teams at the bottom that are Scrum teams. He mentioned how they're teams that are generally cross-functional, so within the team they'll figure out how to get it done. The program level starts to be responsible for driving the work of multiple Scrum teams. You have this portfolio level team at the top. And then you may have some ancillary teams that are helping ensure the portfolio can move forward. He also kind of laid out a structure for work item breakdown. So, starting with that epic, that's the thing the senior leadership cares about, going to a feature where the product owner spends a lot of their energy and thinking, and then getting down to that user story, which the engineering management cares most about. So after we kind of laid that groundwork, we went through I actually also talked about this concept of minimum marketable features. So as you think about your epic and breaking that down to features, we're going to try to deliver subsets of those features that provide the most value early on. Then he went through the 4 essential views, velocity and burn down, roadmap over time, flow, and progress. So The concept around the velocity and burn down was that you've got your Scrum teams, they're working, they're pulling work from how you broke down the epic, grabbing those user stories that are part of an MMF, delivering them, maybe using a task board. As part of doing that, you're going to be creating release burn downs, sprint burn downs, velocity trend to make sure that you really are creating those well-performing agile teams that are going to deliver software back to the organization. So the next item was this concept of a roadmap over time, where you're doing that progressive elaboration, where you'll have much more information about the work in Q1 than you will about the work that's going to be done in Q4. Mike also touched on the fact that you'd want to be identifying risks early in the process. And then once you've identified risks for the work in a particular quarter, you'll want to push spikes to help start mitigating that risk earlier into the process. So those spikes represent some knowledge that needs to be gained in order to ensure that you can deliver on the features that are in a particular quarter. He also touched on the concept of using epics as more of a budgetary item and really letting the product teams focus on, once the epic's been defined, delivering the features that are going to provide the most value with the budget that's available. Then the third item was this concept of flow, so having that multiple tiers. You've got your teams doing Scrum at the bottom, but you also have a workflow that's defined at that product team level or that program level, so that features are flowing through that progression. And then at the top level, you have a workflow as well for your epics. And so by defining what those workflows are, the organization can start being a little bit more wise about how they're using the resources along the way, making sure that they're kind of controlling that flow and not doing too much work in analysis, really focusing on getting features out the door. And then finally, Mike talked about, how are you going to demonstrate progress, discuss the concept of, the organization a lot of times wanting that Gantt chart feel. So how far along are items, when do we expect them to kind of start and end. That can be an important element to ensuring that you're capturing progress and sharing it back internally in the organization. So quick recap of what Mike went over last week. Certainly I haven't done it justice here, but I did want to just kind of get everyone warmed up to those concepts. And at this point, what I wanted to do is kind of go back and kind of walk through, how do you set up this structure of the enterprise portfolio management in version 1, and then kind of what does that work breakdown structure look like in our application. So let's jump in and look at version 1. I am showing here version 1 Ultimate Edition. I think a lot of the capabilities that I'll show will be part of that. And first off, I want to touch on our project tree. And so within the project tree, you're going to set up an organizational structure that matches how you're working. So in this example system, at the very top we have a project that represents our portfolio level, Easy Support Inc. And then below that we have kind of our main development project. That's where the program team resides. And they're going to make sure that the development organization is really delivering the highest value features. Within our particular portfolio, we've kind of got two main products here. We've got a call center product, and maybe there's a Scrum team on that, and then another web meeting product that has a Scrum team at the moment. And you can see there's also some other projects that are going on in the organization, but they really fall outside maybe the scope of this core development program. The final thing that we'll see today is that you also break down the work within a particular product into those release buckets. So Mike was demonstrating or discussing last week around the concept of doing a quarterly release cadence, and that's pretty common. So getting that cadence shortened so that you start to have a release bucket and then having those releases be kind of consistent across the different products within the program. So that's kind of a layout of the portfolio management and the structure within version 1. And then you also have the concept of the work that's going on. So in version 1, there is the idea of this, I'm on here on the epic tree, and you have this epic asset, which is really your higher level planning construct. And so if we drill in and look at a particular epic here, we can see that there's types of epics. So at the highest level, we've defined a type for initiative. And this is something that each organization a lot of times has their own terminology, and you can configure it to match the way you're currently working. Cloud Call Center is an initiative. That's the kind of the highest level, the epic, as Mike was talking about it. And then below that, you have a feature level. And then further below that, for a feature that's been broken down, you can start to see your user stories. So the user story here, hold order. We have another user story for calculate tax. Those are different items in version 1. And so that's the work item breakdown structure. We can see all that here on the epic tree page. So a little bit of context for us as we go through and look at the different views that Mike talked about. And so at this point, I wanted to kind of jump forward and touch on that view of how is the team going to work. So what is the velocity tracking and team interaction with version 1 look like, and show you how the reporting then starts to be useful to the product owner or a program manager in the organization. So first thing I wanted to do is show you team rooms in version 1. And so one of the things that we found is version 1 is trying to service a lot of different roles in the development organization. And this version 1 provides very good support for kind of that project management activity and program management activity. But the development teams want to have interfaces that are optimized for the way they're working. And so that's kind of the concept behind Team Room. Let the development team have a single screen where they don't have to worry as much about navigation, where they can quickly access what they care about for their day-to-day interactions. So in this Team Room, I'm looking at a Scrum team. We can see at the top all the members in that team. I also can quickly see my task board. So similar to what Mike showed, you have a row here for each story or defect, and then the columns are representing the different task statuses. And if I'm going to work on an item, I can just start dragging the item around. If I was going to work on building this UI with Danny, maybe pair up with him, I can sign myself up for that task. We can track our work, entering the time we've spent and the remaining amount to do, and at least showing progress and kind of what we're working on at any time. As you're going and doing that, sometimes it's helpful to look into the backlog and see what else is coming. Maybe you're going to pull in a new story into the sprint. And it's also helpful to be able to quickly see what have we done previously. Sometimes if you're adding on to an existing feature, you might want to look at the story that was previously done to understand the acceptance criteria you decided upon. Additionally, version 1 has conversations. So there's more elaboration going on within your stories as you start to talk about the explicit behaviors you're looking for, and so that you can quickly see the conversations that are occurring across the development team and have them linked back to the work items. So whether you're seeing all the conversations that are kind of happening for the complete set of stories in the sprint, or focusing in on just a particular item, the team is able to collaborate as they're working together on delivering those tasks and stories within the sprint. Finally, when you get back to looking at the reports that Mike mentioned, the team has some feedback here on their currently planned sprint. So in this case, we've planned a little more than our average velocity, and we can see get some insight into our average velocity up here. We also can see our sprint burn down. So that's really the view that the team is going to be most focused on in terms of understanding how we're progressing within a particular sprint. Now, if you're the Scrum Master or a product owner and your thinking is more, hey, are we going to meet kind of that release burn down? How is our sprint velocity as well as our sprint bound down looking? I want to kind of see that in all one place and have a dashboard. You can get that in version 1 as well by just going back to the application and going to the project dashboard. So if I'm a product owner working within Release 1, I can go and look at my project dashboard and see that burn down of the remaining estimates. So that's going to show us how we're progressing in terms of delivering stories. The trend of the total estimate, which helps us understand how well we did within the release of planning work up front. The velocity trend that we saw earlier, but just with a little bit more detail than within the team room. And then some other insights like the trend of tests and just a project level summary. So for the team, we're supporting that kind of the day-to-day interaction. We're giving you the reports that are going to be valuable as you're wanting to understand progress of how the team is doing. And that's really that critical component Mike mentioned around wanting to make sure that you have stable teams and you understand how they're delivering, because using that information and their predictable delivery, you're going to start being able to plan at the program and portfolio level with a little better insight. So the next view that Mike talked about, and this is one where we're going to spend a fair amount of time, because I think it's one that when you would think about planning out your portfolio, this really connects back up into those epics very strongly, is the concept of progressive elaboration. So how does that work in version 1? Let me go back to, in product planning, to the epic tree page. And I'm also going to go and focus at the portfolio level, and that's where my epics reside. So on the epic tree page, we can see a list of all the different initiatives that we've defined, and you'll notice here that they're in that portfolio project. I can also see some other attributes here on the grid, but I wanted to jump in and just take a look in more detail at what can you capture for an epic. So the swag value here, Mike had talked about, wanting to capture that budget. That's really the concept behind the swag. You're not going to have all of your stories created up front to understand, well, how big is this epic? As you go ahead and do your breakdown, you're going to eventually get a roll-up of the estimate for all the stories. And so this Release 1 project is something that's kind of a release underway. And so you may have all of your stories, or the great majority of your stories, already created. But when you first start out a release, you won't have this roll-up of the estimate points, and you do want to be able to understand as an organization, how big do we think this item is? And that's the concept behind the swag. The value scale here can be entered to allow you to compare the relative value between the epics in version 1. You've got a complexity scale to help identify areas where you think you might have a little more risk involved in a certain item. And you also can create custom fields on these items. So if you wanted to start tracking your epics by an investment theme, or you want to start capturing a target date and health, you could add different fields onto the item and then capture that information. So once you've captured these epics, then that portfolio team would be wanting to meet and discuss, well, which ones are the most important to do. And in order to have a nice discussion around that, one of the things that ends up happening is you want to have a good model for thinking about it. So the bubble charts in version 1 can help you take a look at your epics and plot them based on their value scale and their complexity scale, and be able to see for a particular epic, what is the size of it, and where does it fall within that bubble chart. So you can have a good conversation and make sure everyone in the portfolio team is on the same page with, why are we doing these particular items? So if you leave that meeting where you're collaborating with your portfolio team, you may have made some decisions about what comes first, second, third, and so forth from a priority perspective. And version 1 does let you prioritize, just like you do at the team level. You can prioritize your initiatives. So if Cloud Call Center is the second item, then I'll move it up into that location within the epic tree. In addition to wanting to just have the prioritized list, the next thing the portfolio team is going to be saying is, well, okay, if this is our second priority item and this is our first, when can we get those items? What's our vision for how we're going to deliver on those items into the future, so that we can take that vision and make sure it makes sense in context of the rest of the organization. And that's the point behind the version 1 roadmaps. So you can create a roadmap that is going to allow you to place the different epics that you create on the roadmap. You can add new items as you think about them. In addition to focusing on the features that you're going to deliver as part of your development organization, you can also add swim lanes that allow you to connect the delivery of the development organization to events that may be happening in your marketplace, or maybe key rollouts where you have to train a lot of users. In this case, we're also showing integrations. So the roadmap is something that really allows you to paint a vision for where you're heading, as well as take that development vision and integrate it with an overall company vision. All right, so that's a walkthrough of what you can do with your epics at the portfolio level. And now I wanted to kind of dive into this Release 1.0 epic that we talked about that's already been elaborated. And so if I'm the person who wants to really focus on doing that elaboration, maybe I'm the product owner that's responsible for the cloud call center, then I could go in here and say, well, let me just filter down this list in order to see just that item. So I'm going to take a look at Cloud Call Center, and as I go in here and look at what's been done already, I want to point out a couple of things that Mike brought up. The first is that I've got a feature for order check here, and the feature has several stories that have been identified, and then I can start using the priority field on the stories to delineate what are the items that really are part of my MMF versus the items that are more nice-to-haves. And so the priority field becomes a useful mechanism for communicating and tracking what is kind of above the line in terms of these have to get done, and what maybe won't make the cut for this initial release of the order check feature. Another element that comes up during the elaboration is the concept of dependencies. So if we look here at Enter RMA, we might find that we want to track dependencies between Enter RMA and other stories that have been created for other teams to work on. And so in this case, we can see that there are 3 stories that have been created as downstream dependencies for Enter RMA, meaning that Enter RMA has to be completed before we can begin work on these. Now, as you start capturing your dependencies, then at some point you'll probably want to find out, well, how much complexity is there in my overall program, and that's where you can start to view the dependence report that shows all those dependencies that you have. So here we're looking at the items on the left are the items that would need to get done first, and items on the right would then follow. So this is the upstream side and the downstream side. And you can see here that we've got, in some cases, a chain of dependencies occurring. And if quick status check is completed, then credit check is still going to need to get done next. And right now we have a blocking issue on that item. So in addition to seeing, where you may have issues with your most important dependencies, you're also getting a feeling with this dependency report for across your portfolio or your program, what's the overall amount of cross-team dependency that I have occurring. All right, so wanted to walk through a couple of the scenarios that are pretty helpful in terms of once you've done your elaboration, really understanding how you could work with it and having what's available. But I did also want to walk through how you can do some of the elaboration. So what does that look like? So let's jump now to Release 2. So this is a release that we haven't actually finished all the elaboration on. So it's kind of further down in the timeline. So if we look at the Release 2 item for Cloud Call Center, we see that right now we have just that single feature for Customer Calendar. And if I'm the person who's the kind of product manager for that and doing the elaboration around Cloud Call Center, then I might go in and say, well, you know what, I actually, based on some discussions we had, I need to capture some additional features, and so one of them is rep analytics. And that's something that we're going to want to get delivered as part of Release 2, so that's the time frame, hence the project. And then I could put in my user story here. I won't enter the whole thing, and put the type on it of a feature. So I could continue going through and capturing my features. I might start identifying some of the user stories if it's pretty clear, a particular scenario that I know about. I could capture those now, or that might be something we do later in the process when I get together with maybe the product owner and development team for that single Scrum team and decide on, really do that elaboration to get those user stories that will fit inside of a sprint ironed out. The other thing that Mike mentioned as part of this breakdown process is capturing of the risks and creating those spike stories. And he said that was one of the key takeaways he wanted everyone to have from his discussion. So I wanted to show you how you can do that in version 1. If you want to capture a risk, then you can go and create on the feature a blocking issue. So go create a new issue. So let's assume that on this calendar feature that we haven't really dealt with calendars before. So we've got no experience with calendar controls in our organization. So I go ahead and I'll create an issue for that. So that's captured. And then I also can then create that spike story. And notice how I can see that now that the issue's been created, it's I'm getting feedback that there is an issue identified for customer calendar. And so I want to also create that spike story that just says, let's do a POC on a calendar controls. Now, as Mike mentioned, this item you wouldn't want to start in Release 2 because that would mean you haven't reduced your risk. So I can move that item back into Release 1 to make sure it gets covered in that time frame. And the team will go ahead and figure out how to estimate that and later on and make sure that from a technical side we have confidence that we know maybe what calendar control or library we're going to use in order to implement the calendar feature we're looking for. All right, so that's a kind of quick walkthrough of how you can do some of that progressive elaboration that Mike had mentioned. You can take your epics, break those down into features. You have features, you can create user stories underneath them. You also can be identifying those risks as issues in version 1 and then creating spike stories that would be delivered in that previous release time frame in order to help reduce the risk for the following release. So the next topic that Mike brought up was Kanban, and in this kind of n-tiered workflow. We touched on it before, and version 1 does support that as well. So you may have seen quickly within the Epic board view I went to that I can create a workflow for my epics and then manage them visually through the Epic board. So whereas the Epic tree is focused on showing me a prioritized list of all the work, I may be able to see status. The Epic board makes it very clear which status an item is in. So this workflow here is something that gets defined by the organization, so it is flexible. You can add whatever statuses and whatever buffers you may have in your workflow into version 1, so it's really matching your process. You can also identify the policies around when an item should move in or out of a particular state in that workflow. Also, if you're familiar with Kanban, then you'll know that one of the things that it tries to help you do is see when you're putting too much work in process. So there's also WIP limits that can be identified or defined for a particular status. So here, analysis has a WIP limit that's been identified of 4. So maybe the organization is always kind of jumping into analysis because, hey, this is the next new thing, without considering that, well, that's going to put constraint and ask a lot of questions of the development organization and remove their focus away from implementation. So if we said, well, okay, well, we can wait on web chat, we're not going to do that right away, we can move that back out of analysis so we're focused on making sure that we're doing analysis on just the items we want. So we can define those WIP limits, and also I want to touch on the cards here. The card, showing you the title, the progress on an item, the swag on the item. Also, in this case, it's been set up to show you in an investment theme that the item is in. So the cards themselves are configurable, and you can drill into the card just like we saw on the grid to get the additional details around the epic. So besides just the details we saw earlier, I also did want to point out the epic dashboard. So one of the things that is really important is that progressive elaboration and understanding how is that working for the organization. And so this dashboard can give you some good insight into how you have elaborated your epic in terms of how did you create stories for that epic over time. And if we look at Cloud Call Center here, we're seeing over time a bar graph of the estimate and story points, and then the closed stories turn green. So we are working on this epic, and so we're seeing the green move up. But one thing that does stand out from this view is that, well, we did a lot of breakdown right at the beginning. So we had all of our stories defined almost up to that 150 mark at the very beginning of this epic. So that may have been something where we removed a lot of risk, but we also spent probably a lot of time and discussions getting to that point where we had all those stories. So that may or may not be the right thing for the organization, but you can get a feeling for how do we create stories over time for this particular epic. Below that, you have a breakdown of your epic, so you can see the initiative itself as well as the features underneath it. And this can be set up to provide additional insights into how many unestimated backlog items, how many blocking issues do I have rolling up. And then finally below, you have a breakout of who's being impacted by a particular epic. So in this case, we've got actually some estimate that's for Cloud Call Center. Since it's a new release, a fair amount of the estimate for delivering this project is going to be handled by outside of IT in the corporate website. So you're able to see that there's some impacts here to the corporate website team, but there's also substantial impact to the development team in order to get this done. Primarily, or actually, that's wholly done by this call center Scrum team, which is what you'd expect. So the Epic dashboard lets you have that deep insight into who's working on my Epic, and as we do that breakdown, what does it look like? All right, so that's the Kanban at the very highest level, at our initiative level. You can also get that same Kanban at a lower level by just switching your project selection. So here I'll go down to my program team, and you'll notice as we switch that we can see the status values change, the items change to be the features instead of the initiative level. And you also can, you noticed earlier we created an issue on customer calendar, and you can see here that that's also being identified as on the board. So you're getting insight into your blocking issues that are occurring as well. In addition to having the Epic board at the program level, we also have it at the team level. So a lot of times it's helpful for development teams to see their progression of work through the different statuses. And so within something like the team room, if you have a team that's focused more on Kanban, then they're able to see their status progression. They also can certainly have metrics like how many days something was in a certain column. And so all through the organization, you're able to make sure you focus on flow and removing those bottlenecks that are occurring, making sure you don't have too much work in progress. All right, so that's a discussion on Kanban. I showed you how you can do it at the epic level, the feature level, and the user story level within version 1. The final thing I wanted to touch on was how do you show progress to the organization? So Mike had talked about this kind of idea of the organization being really comfortable with having a Gantt chart and knowing the kind of progress. Within version 1, we've already seen some ways you can do that. One way that you can get insight into the progress is just by looking at that epic tree view. So as you may have noticed before, if I go back and look at the Easy Support Inc. level, I can see a progress bar showing me how much work we've done so far. I also can see the status and items in. I can see the size. So I get a lot of rich information from the epic tree page. I also can quickly drill in to see what's beneath it. And in this case, we've set up the system to have a target date for the features that are being delivered. So it's easy to see, okay, when am I expecting this customer management to be ready for maybe a customer who's looking to do beta testing on it. So that's a visualization, or this is a view that gives you a lot of detail around the epics. The other item I just showed you was the epic dashboard that can give you really some good insights into how have we been working on this epic over time. But in some organizations, they want to have less focus on all the details, and just for that portfolio level team, a very simple view that just says, what are we working on, what's our percent complete, and what's the health of it? Is it red, yellow, or green? And so version 1 has an analytics environment that can allow you to create custom reports. And this is an example of where it can be helpful. So if I go and look at a custom created program status report, I can take the information that's been captured in version 1 and create something that's very simple for the portfolio team that helps them understand, for the particular program we're working on, what are the features that we're trying to get done in the next release? For each of those features, how does program management feel about them? In this case, red might mean that, well, we can't get this done based on our current target date. So we need to replan that feature. We've learned more about it, and we want to get things from red back into green, where we have a plan that now makes sense again. So as you progress through your sprints, things could be turning yellow or red, and you'll want to do that replanning at the next sprint planning session, the next time your program or portfolio team gets together, to make those hard decisions about what's going to really be in or out for this release based on what we know right now. So that's a walkthrough of the progress reporting available in version 1, and I think we're now kind of at the end of walking through what Mike had talked about. Certainly there's a lot more capability that is in version 1, but I did want to try to give you guys some insights into how we support the concepts Mike talked about. And at this point, Claire, I think I wanted to turn it back over to you and kind of see if we have any questions from the audience. And so I'll turn it back over to you.
Wonderful. Thanks, Andy. And that really was a great demo. It was really helpful seeing how the main concepts that Mike discussed can be applied in practice and being able to visualize them in version 1. So that was fantastic. Thank you. Okay, we've covered a huge amount of content in the course of this webinar series, and so we will be opening it up for questions in just a moment, but we would like to check in with each of you and just get a quick sense about how you're feeling about everything you've seen and heard over the last couple of weeks. So just take a second, let us know, are you now feeling completely enlightened about Enterprise Agile and have a good understanding about what it is? Or maybe you're kind of somewhere on that happy path to figuring it out. And it's also okay to let us know if you're still feeling confused. So we'll just take a moment and get everybody's feedback. Okay. So the results look very encouraging. It looks as though a lot of folks are on that happy path, and many of you are enlightened. Glad to see that not too many people are feeling confused. To that end, we are going to be sending out a white paper in the coming couple of days, which will just give you a little bit more overview of how all of these concepts tie together. So hopefully that will further support your efforts to understand this topic and learn how to apply it. In terms of next steps from here as well, we would like to say to you, please do reach out and talk to us here at version 1 if there's anything at all we can do to help support your enterprise agile transition. And finally, we do also encourage you to join the ongoing discussion on our Agile Managers Forum on LinkedIn. It's a great way to open up your thoughts and questions for community dialogue. So do participate in that. Right, so let's take a look at some of the questions that we've been receiving. It looks like a few of them, Andy, are sort of clarifying points on how you do things in version 1. So one of the early questions that came in was with regards to the project hierarchy. And just to understand how you were naming the projects, and so was each project linked directly to a release? And if you could just clarify a little bit more about how you were using the project hierarchy.
Sure. Yeah. The release level projects are the lowest level within the project tree normally, and so they are just a project kind of a different type, and so there's not really too much more to it than that. One thing I will show you. Thanks for passing back control. Sorry about that. So release projects are at the bottom of the tree. One thing I didn't go into that is important to note is, if what's commonly done is for the program, you've got someone like a program manager who cares about, and the program team in general is going to care about not everything within all these different projects, but just what's in this release project and what's in that release project. And so that's the concept of programs in version 1. So you can define a program for release 1, and it's just going to, you just say which projects are part of it, in this case, both release projects. And then when you look at the information in the product, it's going to show you only items that are in those 2 releases of release 1 for call center and release 1 for the web meeting. And this applies to the views like the backlog view. It also applies to things like reporting. So if I want to look at a summary of my program, I can see all my release 1 projects and where we are with those. Or if I want to look at a project dashboard for the program, I can see an aggregate of all the different stories across whatever release projects I have selected. So hopefully that answers the question.
Yeah, no, I think that's very helpful. Thanks, Andy. The next question is like a high-level question with regards to all of the different views and levels that you've been showing. And folks wondering if the different views are role-based within version 1, or can everybody see everything?
So the views aren't necessarily role-based as much. This is the common navigation. If you were on a role of like a team member, you'd be coming in and looking at the team room from the standpoint of kind of security and who can see what. There is security, and that's tied in through the project tree. So if you had a very large organization where you've got development teams that are working on one particular program, it's pretty common to give them visibility across the program, but you can narrow it down so they might be able to see all items in the whole system, but only then be able to actually work and change data within the particular project. And so there is project level securities that you can control it. There's predefined groups everywhere from read only to the ability to manage security for other people.
Okay, great. A clarifying question with regards to the health category that you showed earlier, and just asking more questions about what is the basis for determining health?
Yeah, so let me actually go in and show you the epic tree. And one of the things that I think the community is still figuring out is how do you determine health? And I think the Agile community initially with the burn downs, and there's a strong desire to really use working software as the way that you would say, well, here's why we're healthy, because we've delivered something to you, right? So that's kind of the concept behind kind of a release burn down, where you're saying, well, we've delivered stories that are showing you our progress, as opposed to we've done some activity. So where the health comes in terms of what I think I've seen a lot of our larger customers doing is they've got someone who's maybe a program manager or someone who's responsible for that feature who looks across everything they know about it, and they're making a judgment call based on all the data they have in version 1 and based on their conversations with people to make sure that they're telling the organization what they think about the health of that item. And so in this case, if I'm saying it's green, green would be defined as the current plan we have is working pretty well. If I said it was yellow or red, that would say that, well, what we planned when we maybe did our release planning, we're not going to be able to deliver the way we thought. We've learned something new. And if you wanted to start capturing exactly what is driving the health from the way that a program manager is thinking about it, that's where you can start creating blocking issues or capturing issues in version 1, as I mentioned. So if you wanted to get a little more detailed with how you're doing that sort of activity, you can create issues in version 1 that are tied to a particular item or just general issues that are getting in the way of the portfolio or a program in general from delivering.
Okay, great, thank you. The next question is, are there any resource views in version 1 that show who is working on what?
Yeah, there's lots of views that show who's working on what. So the main view of who's working on what would be the storyboard, which you can see here, there's icons for the people who are assigned ownership to that story, and the task board, where I can see who's working on the particular items. From a resource perspective, kind of at the higher program level, the focus there is really around making sure you understand how much capacity do I have release over release. So within release scheduling, if I have a consistent team and I go in and look at my call center team, I'm able to see the amount of estimate in terms of what we've delivered over time in my releases and make sure that I'm not overcommitting the team that's available to do the work for that particular area.
Okay, thank you. The next question is how you would handle the date slippage for releases, and is there any way of tracking the impact of that?
There's a couple of things you can do there that I didn't go into. One of them is around release forecasting. So if I'm looking at the release for the call center team, release forecasting allows me to look at our remaining estimate that we currently have in there, what's our projected velocity, which it could be based on, if I go to the defaults, it's based on what the team has done in the past. And I could run this to show me what we should expect if we continue at that rate. I can also run some what-if scenarios. So if I know that we're going to lose a team member and that team member is pretty productive, I might assume that we're only going to have a projected velocity of 25, and how does that affect our the forecast compared to the currently scheduled end date. So that's one way to look at it is you have a release forecasting where you can start running what-if scenarios based on what you know. And like we discussed earlier around the MMFs and having that priority come into play, you also could, when you're looking at the estimate, start to include just your high priorities and say, how does that make our release plan look? So that's one aspect. The other thing I wanted to show you that's pretty powerful in one of our more popular reports is the scope change report. The scope change report is going to give you insight into exactly what is causing the scope change for your particular project. And so if I'm looking at release 1 and I want to understand over the last 2 weeks, I know we made some changes as the product owner, and they made sense at the time, and now I'm here today and I'm wondering what I did. It's pretty easy in version 1 to look back and see what's been added. Okay, we had some defects that we said we had to get done, but we also added several stories. We didn't really remove anything except this one defect, and we also changed our estimate on something because we had a little misunderstanding about exactly what we were asking for with quick status checks. So the project scope change report can allow you to take any 2 dates, oftentimes it'd be today, and compare it to some point in the past, and start date oftentimes would be, after we did release planning, what did we change after that? And it gives you some insight into what's causing your scope change, recognizing that you in an Agile organization, you may be pulling things in and out, but that is going to mean your original plan is not necessarily going to be the one you end up with.
Okay, thanks, Andy. The next question, again, is another clarifying one, and it's, how do epics differ from initiatives?
Yeah, so I mentioned this at the beginning, but I think it is worth reviewing, so I'm glad that someone asked about it. So version 1 has 2 levels of planning, in terms of artifacts in the application. So one of them is the epic level, and that's what the purple items you see here in the grid. And the other one is the story level. So the story level is kind of the items that teams work on inside of a sprint. So the epic level, the epic feature of version 1, so epics in version 1 can be created in as many levels as you want. So you're not confined to what Mike had talked about in terms of the epic feature user story paradigm, which I think is a very popular approach. One thing that often comes up is when you define your features, you then have a level in between here that's kind of a sub-feature where it's the part of a feature that a certain team owns. So that can be created in version 1 as well. So if I look at my order entry feature, I could then add an additional child epic that is the sub-feature for that. Initiative just represented, and from what Mike was talking about, that's the epic level, the highest level that the portfolio team cares about. And this list of types is something that it can be defined by an organization, so you're not stuck with the types that we define for you.
Okay, that makes good sense. Thank you. I think we probably have time for one, perhaps 2 more questions. So the next question, which a lot of people have been asking about, is estimating and addressing the fact that with portfolio planning, a lot of the estimation needs to be done up front, but then a lot of folks commenting that point estimates are typically always wrong, and just any sort of guidance on how you go about doing that and accounting for the variance.
Yeah, so I think that's a good point, in that there's a lot of uncertainty in software development. So if you're at the portfolio level and you're putting an initial swag on something like this 150 points, that's the initial budget where the organization says this feels about right. We want to kind of see where we get. If you get into the project and you realize that it's not 157 to get this done, but it's actually 250. Then that's an opportunity for the portfolio level team to get together and talk about, given that new information, does this still make sense? Is this still the item that's going to give us the most value now that we know that the cost is much higher? And also you're taking into consideration where you are with it. If you learn that information very late in the process, you kind of have to say, well, given where we are with having already invested that, it's kind of sunk costs in the software we've developed, we now know it's going to be this much more, where, knowing that, what makes sense. So I don't think there's any, hey, you have to do it this way kind of answer. But it's certainly an area where there'd be some need for more collaboration to really understand what the current current reality is. The other element that's partly in that question is, what are the right units to use for the swag? And I think some organizations will try to change units to talk about man months instead of using the story points, or some might want to use dollars because the portfolio level team is focused on dollars. There is some benefit to using the same, being consistent with your units, because then it makes it very easy to do comparisons. You might find that your approach to doing your swag, initial swag, isn't using story points, and you're doing a conversion from man months to story points. That's not something that version 1 has tried to be very prescriptive about in the application. We are providing this estimate value for you so that you can use it in the way that makes the most sense for your organization.
Wonderful. Thank you, Andy. And that really does bring us to the top of the hour. So I would just like to thank everybody once again for participating in this webinar series. We will be following up in a couple of days with recordings to both of the webinars and also the white paper that I mentioned earlier. So thank you very much for your time. And Andy, thank you for doing such a fantastic job.
No, I enjoyed it. Thank you, Claire.
Okay. Thanks, everyone. Goodbye.